Very funny.
We now give you our brand new little sweetheart of swing.
Welcome to Stay Tuned, the show for animation lovers, recorded live on YouTube and proudly streaming on Patreon. Coming to you from Austin, Texas, I'm your host, Phil Machi. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. My first review of 2019 is a film that swung into theaters at the end of 2018. Sony Pictures Animation's Into the Spider-Verse receives my first impressions treatment tonight. All that, and you'll have a chance to share your thoughts, questions, and opinions with me for a live Q&A after the show. You know how an insect gets caught up in a spider's web? Once in the spider's clutches, it is very unlikely that anything could pry the tiny morsel out of the arachnid's eager jaws. Well, that spider is Sony, and that tiny delicious bug is the character of Spider-Man. And crummy analogies aside, we're about to take a closer look at the latest attempt from Sony to hang on to their spider rights in just a few moments. But first, this. If I told you there was a new superhero film in theaters, you'd probably be less than surprised. And if I told you it was about Spider-Man, whatever remaining surprise you did have would also vanish. That's because since 2002, Sony has made film after film of your neighborhood's friendly wall crawler. And arguably, most of them have only kinda gotten it right. As Disney's hold over the Marvel Cinematic Universe has only increased with time, things weren't looking too good for old Spidey. The shared partnership, or is it joint custody rights, that led to Captain America Civil War, Spider-Man Homecoming, and Avengers Infinity War made a pretty good argument for Sony to finally let go, or at the very least, continue sharing Spider-Man with Disney. But good old stubborn Sony just doesn't know when to quit, and 2018 brought us a standalone Venom film in which Spider-Man was nowhere to be seen. And of course, the reason we're all here tonight, the animated Into the Spider-Verse. There's an expression about a blind squirrel eventually finding a nut, and a stopped clock being correct twice a day. And as tempting as it is to compare all that to Sony and their handling of Spider-Man, tonight's film is actually the result of what can happen when Hollywood just lets artists create art. It can be intimidating when you stop and think about how this is the 6th Spider flick to come from Sony, if you don't count Venom, or the shared licensing agreement with Marvel, or the shared licensing agreement with Marvel Studios films. And it's reasonable to wonder where this one lies in the general continuity. Well, that's the beauty of Into the Spider-Verse. It does and it doesn't. Brilliantly, this story centers around the idea of multiple universes, as the name of the film implies. So it both acknowledges the existence of what you've already seen and at the same time has pretty much nothing to do with any of it. All you really need to know is provided for you in this movie, and that is a kid named Miles Morales, voiced by Sinead Moore, who admires Spider-Man, has a father who is a policeman, who is not a fan of the web slinger. Miles has a less than desirable social life at school, and an uncle named Aaron who relates to Miles better than his own father. While visiting Uncle Aaron, played by Mahershala Ali, the two bond over the art of graffiti in an abandoned subway station. It is here where Miles gets his first taste of a new life, when a radioactive spider gets its first taste of Miles. Miles, in true Spider-Man fashion, develops spider-related abilities, while searching for his uncle for assistance after realizing this was no ordinary spider. Miles stumbles upon a massive underground plot involving classic villain, the Kingpin. Voiced by Liev Schreiber, Kingpin is playing mad scientist and attempting to access alternate dimensions using a particle accelerator. But this isn't your usual take over the world situation. No. Kingpin is trying to retrieve something he lost in a previous battle with Spider-Man, his wife and child. They died in a car accident after fleeing Kingpin himself when they walked in on him duking it out with the hero. Of course, Kingpin blames Spider-Man for the loss of his family. His solution is to replace them with an alternate version. This is a landmark moment for Miles because during the struggle to stop Kingpin, he and Spider-Man discover one another using their similar spider senses. But also, it is during the battle that Kingpin succeeds in killing Spider-Man. That's right, in this reality, Peter Parker dies. But not before leaving his eventual replacement, Miles, with a USB drive and the mission to use it to disable the particle accelerator. Right off the bat, the visual style of the film jumps out at you. That's because it's an incredible example of the collaborative spirit. It blends artistic styles and draws inspiration from the dynamic nature of a comic book. In comics, every frame matters, which leads to a series of memorable and ultimately idealized moments. There are very few examples of comic book adaptations that have attempted to recreate this effect cinematically, and even fewer that have done so successfully. A great live-action example of this would be Frank Miller's Sin City, and a nice try but not quite example can be found in Ang Lee's Hulk. In a recent interview on Polygon.com with one of the film's two art directors, Patrick O'Keefe, he states, quote, "This is my first animated film. I worked previously doing a lot of concept art for video games and for advertising. I always wanted to do animated films, but I was always bothered by the idea that the final look of the film landed so far from the inspired concept art. I felt like I wouldn't have much of an impact on the way a film looks because it goes through the studio machine. I never knew where I could fit in. And then here was an opportunity where they wanted to do something different and did need to look outside the box." End quote. As best I can describe it, Into the Spider-Verse is the visual equivalent of opening a comic book and watching it spring to life in front of you. This is also supported by a rich color palette that evokes the grittiness and vibrancy of the city. While the primary means of animation does utilize CGI, the delayed frame rate, individually painted textures, and selective use of imagery combine to make something so visually robust, my initial reaction straight out the gate was, I'm gonna have to see this again. But animation alone isn't enough to make a solid film, and I'm happy to say, in terms of voice acting, soundtrack, and pacing, Into the Spider-Verse doesn't let down there either. Back to our story. Miles feels the weight on his young shoulders now that his hero has passed. So, naturally, he rushes out to purchase a cheap costume and practices his newfound abilities. During which things don't go according to plan, and he accidentally damages the vital USB drive that can stop the particle accelerator should it ever be activated again. Which, of course, you know it will. Thankfully, Miles receives some welcome assistance from Peter Parker. No, not that Peter Parker. He's dead, remember? He's dead, remember? This is Peter B. Parker, a Spider-Man from an alternate universe, and he's not what you'd expect. In his universe, love of his life, Mary Jane Watson, became his ex-wife, and Aunt May recently passed too. This is a brooding, jaded Peter Parker who has all but given up on caring. But the particle accelerator it's hard to say. But the particle accelerator brought him to Miles' dimension accidentally, and of course, he doesn't belong here. More pressing, we find out that to stay in the wrong universe leads to one's eventual deterioration. Oh no! Miles now has a very capable, albeit reluctant, mentor, and soon discovers Peter isn't the only strange traveling spider person. That new girl at his school is actually an alternate universe Gwen Stacy, aka Spider-Gwen. Gwen leads Miles and Peter to see May Parker, who has converted a backyard shed into a bona fide spider cave of sorts to protect 3 more transplants. Spider-Man Noir, a black and white 1930s interpretation. SPDR, an anime-inspired combination of mech suit and teenage girl Penny Parker. And Spider-Ham, the resulting blend of Spider-Man with a cartoon pig in the classic Warner Brothers style. I should mention Warner Brothers Looney Tunes style. I should mention that some truly inspired casting takes place here between Nicolas Cage as Spider-Man Noir and John Mulaney as Spider-Ham. In another example of pushing the limits, each character is represented in their own unique animation style separate from the films. This artistic decision helped drive home that these are characters dislodged from time and space. To quote O'Keefe once more, quote, when we would do our reviews, they were open to pretty much anybody who wanted to come in. When I first jumped on the team as a viz dev artist, I would go to every review I possibly could. It was all about catching the vibe. I think that openness led to people becoming more invested. Once you have a sense of ownership, you have a sense of responsibility to make sure that this thing is the best it can be. I think for everybody, it felt like such an amazing opportunity, end quote. A perfect big screen experience, the frantic action of flying through the streets of New York amidst taxis and wet pavement practically leaps towards the audience. I only wish I had seen the film in 3D, but believe me when I say this, even without those special glasses, it almost felt as if I had. That's because one of the most unique visual elements of the film is how there isn't play with the depth of field, at least not in the traditional sense. Instead, the filmmakers used CMYK offsetting, like one would see on paper from a four-pass printing press. Combined with textured halftones and a reductive graphic style, Into the Spider-Verse betrays its CGI roots, and the results are unlike the pristine perfection we've come to expect in recent years. Throughout the rest of the story, Miles struggles to find his place amongst far more experienced spider folk. They are all fish out of water in his Brooklyn-based home, and yet with so little time to acclimate to his new abilities, it is also Miles who doesn't belong. These things get to the heart of what has always made Spider-Man such a relatable character. A hero dealing with identity issues and, of course, great responsibility. Feeling out of place within the familiar is the struggle of any teenager, and so it's easy to relate to Miles. What's more, he transcends his racial status. We aren't given a minority character bestowed the rights of a superhero. We're given a hero who happens to be a minority. Likewise, this isn't just an excellent superhero movie. It's a fantastic film that happens to be about superheroes. Miles Morales is half African American, half Puerto Rican, And yet, this isn't something the story shoves into your face. It's simply allowed to be. For my money, that is the absolute best way to preach acceptance and diversity. Not by screaming a message, but by merely treating the character how anyone wants to be treated, like a person. This is further carried by the range of characters that are represented from across the Spider-Verse. I'm happy to report that between incredible camera work and bizarre particle effects, the film's climax is nothing short of psychedelic and a visual treat for the senses. Into the Spider-Verse is what happens when a team pushes themselves, and at the same time, confidently steps out into the void to show the world what they can really do. This was all too apparent from just my first watch through, and it even made me wonder why we don't see more brilliance like this more often. Because truthfully, Sony Pictures Animation made it look easy here. This is the same company that thought the Emoji Movie was a better choice in film over Popeye the Sailor. Miles Morales is a very real, very relatable young man whom you are generally rooting for throughout the entire story. His multi-dimensional namesakes are each delightful in all their own ways too, the result of which is a feeling of inclusiveness most films wish they could successfully achieve. The movie has already more than tripled its budget, so it's no wonder a sequel and a spin-off are already in the works. And while I am very curious to see how close to this high bar anyone else can reach, without a doubt, Into the Spider-Verse proves it can be done. Which means we can expect to see copycats going forward. And you know what? Good. I hope studios start taking risks once more, because as O'Keefe stated, there is typically a huge disconnect between the inspirational concept art and the mass-produced results that follow on screen. This is what animation has the power to do when the right motivation is behind it. Here's hoping we don't have to hop dimensions before finding it again. With producers Phil Lord and Christopher Miller at the helm, the gents behind Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and the Lego Movie, I'm confident good things are in store. Look, a big part of Spider-Man's charm, and by that I mean both Peter Parker and Miles Morales, is that he's a kid. An awkward kid who was thrown into a situation he didn't ask for, and ultimately wants to do the right thing. He's an outsider, and I think it speaks volumes that it took people like Patrick O'Keefe and composer Daniel Pemberton, who were outsiders when it came to animation, to push the medium. A new bar has been set, and it's a truly exciting time in animation because, as this film proves, the only limits are one's imagination. Combine that with a team who rallies around a singular goal that encourages collaboration in telling the right story in the best way possible, and well, true brilliance is the outcome. I'm giving Into the Spider-Verse 10 out of 10 radioactive spiders. As always, we're about to take a short intermission where we'll listen to a little music from tonight's feature. Insert music here for the podcast. That was Escape the Subway and Take the S Train from the score to Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, composed by Daniel Pemberton. In perhaps one of the most brilliantly paired team-ups for a film I've seen, Daniel created a score that, similar to the visual style of the film itself, defies preconceived boundaries. Combining jazz, electronic dance, and record scratching to represent the manic situations experienced by Miles, the score is fresh and feels very true to the city it represents. It also does the job in matching to the various spider characters who all have their own flair. Daniel rose to the occasion in this, his first feature-length animated film. His previous works have been mostly live-action live-action thrillers. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Thanks so much to all of you listening in live on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed the show, and if you would like to support Stay Tuned and listen anytime, join me over on Patreon at patreon.com/Phil Machi to become a subscriber today. Among the cool rewards available there, you can also stream this show anytime you like, which means never missing an episode. For more fun, check out my original comic books at retailsunshine.com, and you can interact with me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook under the handles of both Retail Sunshine and Phil Machi. Also, you can keep up to date with the latest animation news by visiting this show at facebook.com/Stay Tuned Show. I've been Phil Machi, you've been a wonderful audience, and until next time, keep those eyeballs peeled, those ears open, and be sure to stay tuned. Hey everybody! Thanks for being here. Welcome to the after party. Thank you for the like, whoever gave me a like. Much appreciated. I'm going to export export my audio. All right. That way I make sure I get to keep my audio in case anything were to happen. Well, welcome to the after party. You've made it. Thank you so much for being here. And we now get to talk about whatever it is you guys want to talk about. So let's talk about Into the Spider-Verse. And before I get to that, before I start reading all your comments, I just want to remind everybody a couple of announcements, first of all. So next week, be here next week, I've got my second part of